Hello, everyone. This is Warhawk Beyond 2040, and welcome to a very special edition of the movie review series. And today we are going to be talking about Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which is the first ever DC animated movie. And we are joined by the one and only Rex DeBoss 11. Rex, how you doing?
I am doing well. Hey guys, how's it going? Let's talk about Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
All right. So, Mask of the Phantasm, the first ever Batman animated movie, which came out in 1993, almost 29 years ago. So, before we get into talking about the movie, we're just going to have a little quick chat about how we first became aware of this animated classic. So, Rex, we'll start with you first. How did you first hear about Batman Mask of the Phantasm, and what was your impression of it?
Well, truthfully, I actually heard about this way back in like 1994 or 1995 when it first started being, passed around and tape traded around, or, you'd get a copy of somebody else as just entertainment from my big brother or whatever. He was obviously a fan like I was in the early 90s of the animated series, the Batman animated series. And then I think it was a few years down the line that he just bought home a load of Batman and other stuff. It was copies of the Batman Forever movie and whatever else, about 95 times that he bought home a load of Batman stuff. And one of the things was this cartoon of the Mask of the Phantasm. And, when you watch it when you're young, you don't really follow the plot line. It's just like an episode of the animated series. But as I've got older and I've seen this and I've understood it, you can clearly see how much production they took from the animated series and then they leveled it up to make this. And this is probably, and I'm going to say this early, this is probably the best ever Batman animated movie or DC
Absolutely.
animated movie. I've not actually seen them all, but I'll say of the Batman movies that I've seen that are animated, this style, this presence in this drawing in this era, you won't get any better than this. They really had something special here.
Definitely. First time I became aware of Mask of the Phantasm, I'd seen the name come up a few times in the TV magazines. I was already watching the animated series by that point, and it was one of those things I always wanted to see it, but I always kept missing it. And one day on Boxing Day in 1985, it came on ITV, and I asked my dad, "Oh, it's Mask of the Phantasm. I really want to see it. Can you record it for me?" And he said, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it for you." So he recorded it for me. And my initial reaction before I watched it, I thought, "Oh, it's probably just going to be like an episode of the show, but just maybe a little bit longer." And then I started watching it, and the first thing that blew my mind was that opening epic choral choir-like theme of the Batman theme. I thought, holy cow, this is not my dad's Batman. This is nothing like the animated series. This is like watching the Tim Burton movies, but animated. And I knew, just hearing how powerful the soundtrack was, I thought, all right, this is going to be something really special. This is going to be something really different. And I remember watching it, the first time watching it, the actual film, it was very different. I mean, there wasn't swearing in it, but you could see there was a bit more blood. It was a bit more extreme, and it just felt completely far removed from the show, even though it was connected to the show. I thought, wow, how could I have gone so long without seeing this? And from there, I watched it many, many times. I eventually bought the proper copy of it on VHS, and I realized that there was a lot more stuff that was cut out of what they showed on TV. There was like a lot more scenes. And yeah, almost 29 years later, Batman Mask of the Phantasm is my all-time favorite Batman animated movie. It's in my top three, with Return of the Joker and Under the Red Hood, and Mask of the Phantasm is number one. And it's an absolute classic. I can watch it again and again, just never get bored of it, really. I mean, I definitely agree with what you said. It's probably the greatest Batman animated movie of all time.
Yeah, I'd say that. And also, it makes sense that my memory of it being given to me as a recorded from something tape videotape makes sense that Batman Forever would have been released in the late 95, and
Yeah.
then this had been on ITV in late 95 as well. And then
Yeah.
somehow I ended up with a long play video of Batman Forever with this on the same tape. I remember this specifically being put on the end of the tape for that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
And obviously, it's got nothing to do with Batman Forever, really. This was actually between Batman Returns and Batman Forever, where they started, obviously, to go in the more comedic,
Yeah.
kid-friendly style, Joel Schumacher style. But yeah, you are right. The opening scene of this, which I actually am watching in the background right now, where Batman takes on the bad guys, and then obviously the Phantasm turns up and has the scene in the car park and all that with the gangster or the criminal or whatever. And
Yeah.
at first he's scared, and then he spins around in the car, doesn't he? And then tries to run him over. You see that sneaky little grin where it shows you that he, as the bad guy, is like, you get the early image of, you've got one bad guy, which is all these criminals, and you've got Batman that the Gotham citizens might look at as he's the bad guy.
Mm.
But then there's also this other bad guy who isn't actually fully a bad guy, because you know that he's going after the other bad guys, but he's not necessarily doing it in the way that Batman would do it. So this is where this brings in this whole dynamic of, Batman's not exactly a good guy. He's doing bad things for good reasons. Whereas, like other people, like the Phantasm, they are not necessarily good people, but they're also doing maybe good things for the wrong reasons, or bad things for the good reasons, or you know what I mean, etc. I said this before about the Peacemaker thing. This is one of the early signs of DC understanding that Batman is not just a hero to everyone. This guy dressed in this costume who beats the crap out of these criminals. Some of these criminals aren't criminals in the extent of they're all bad. They actually do pay for little things in Gotham City. Like, we've seen that over the years, haven't we? That some of these criminals are involved in charity. They're involved in these events. They don't just look down on the poor and use the poor and stuff like that. Whereas the rich people, like Bruce Wayne and stuff like that, they kind of do look down their nose on the poor.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
Definitely.
and there is this element of who really is the bad guy in Gotham City. Is it Batman and those people there, or is it Bruce Wayne and those people there? And this is a perfect example of that. I mean, I like the dynamic of the Phantasm character, and I wish that we'd actually got to see more of this type of character in the DC universe going forward. Obviously, we know, by the end of this, who it is and what is going off here. But I was looking through the thing, and there's not really been much development for these characters. You know, the Beaumonts or whatever they're called.
Phantasm, for a long, long time, was only in the movie.
Yeah.
There was a tie-in. There was a tie-in comic which I've got, Batman and Robin Adventures Annual, which picks up from the events of Mask of the Phantasm. It's quite a good little comic book, and Phantasm made a brief cameo in Justice League Unlimited epilogue, but had no lines. The Phantasm was hired by Amanda Waller to try and take out Terry McGinnis's parents, but Phantasm at the last minute decided not to do it, and that was about it, really. That was all you got, really. And they brought back Phantasm many years later in the Batman Beyond tie-in comic book series called Mark of the Phantasm, which is basically a play on the animated movie, and we see the Phantasm in Neo Gotham.
Is this the same woman that played it, the Andrea character, or
Yes,
was the
it's the same.
Phantasm character
It's the same.
by somebody else?
Yeah, it's the same character. So it's still the same lady, but she's much older, and she's in.
Okay. Obviously, she has love interest with. She was a previous love interest of Bruce Wayne. In fact, she's the one where it kind of shows that the reason why he's got these attachment issues with women, because he proposed to her, doesn't he?
Yes.
In this, he proposes to Andrea in this, and she obviously abandons him and leaves him and all that kind of stuff. And it's really good how the producers of this knew how to loop you back around. Like you say, this could have easily been a 2-part episode of the Batman animated series, but I think it actually was written as a 2-part Batman animated series episode arc. But I think that they just decided this was so good, and this storyline was so good, that they decided, we can actually change this a little bit. Let's have Bruce Wayne going through this playboy lifestyle where he has all these women vying over him and vying over his attention, all that kind of stuff. But on top of that, let's also have him that the reason why that he's like that is because of his past with a different woman.
Yes.
And you've only got to look at the scene where he is talking to those three like women who are trying to get him to either to sleep with them or they're trying to get him to be involved with them. All the characters have got black eyes, and then Andrea walks in and she's got emerald blue eyes. You know, you can clearly see that you're supposed to pay attention to her more than you're supposed to pay attention to anyone else in that scene.
What was your first impression, look-wise, of the Phantasm character? Because this doesn't really get talked about much from a lot of people, so I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Obviously, it's got the Shredder / sort of, you know, Skeletor vibe to it.
Yeah, definitely.
I would have potentially have gone, and I think if they would have been able to have gone back, I would have gone with a completely different colour for the costume, or more grey rather than black, because it obviously I understand that it's designed as well as to strike fear in people. It's also designed to look similar to another character, which obviously would of course be Batman. Yeah, so that people might actually think that the person who's killing these criminals, which they obviously do in the film, is Batman. I didn't have a problem with the way the Phantasm costume looks, but when you have watched years and years and years of the development of what DC have done with characters like Arrow and Prometheus and all that, you can see where I'm going with this, can't you?
Yeah.
The character is basically the first version of all of those characters and their costumes in the DC universe from 2011 onwards. That Phantasm character, apart from the mask, very similar to Prometheus, very similar to the Green Arrow, very similar to those types of costumes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And obviously they are stylized in the DC universe as being, you know, different coloured versions of Batman.
Yeah.
Without the bat wings and the bat things like that. You know, most of the characters don't go as far as having the actual design and that of the character that they're based on. But obviously Batman does. But I like the look of the Phantasm character. And I think, personally myself, I think that looking back, this either could have been a real good half a season story arc in the Batman animated series, or this could have been maybe 1 or 2 films all in a row. Like, looking back on it, I feel like it was a little bit anticlimactic how the Joker just figures out who
we'll
Phantasm is, and how he figures out that just because Batman's standing next to the Wayne graveyard stone, that she figures out that he's Bruce. There was a few little things in this that I did kind of think, are we just trying to push along the plot line so we don't have to do any more, because we don't want to drag this on anymore, because they obviously decided not to drag this one out. They could have, actually looking back on this, they could have dragged this out for half of the series of the Batman animated series, but they decided to just condense it into 90 minutes or 80 minutes of screen time or whatever, which is clever, but I'd still argue and say. And there's also little things in this where, you know, they give you little hinklings, like Andrea's character, how when she was with Bruce, she's a lot brighter and lighter in the way that she is. When she comes back, she's a lot darker in tone. Even the color of her car is a darker like pink or a darker like red or orange, if you notice. Yeah, like it's obviously a different car, but you know what I mean? Like everything about her is slightly darker. There's little hints about where you're going and who the character would be, like even before they reveal that she, of course, who she is. Like there is little subtle hints in the drawings and in the things if you watch it. And I think it's really clever from Warner Brothers and DC at this time to actually put Batman in this. I think this was a reaction to Batman Returns, but it's also a positive. That's why I truly believe that the Joel Schumacher film, the first one, Batman Forever, wasn't supposed to be as comedy as it was. I think it was supposed to still have some kind of dark element to it, because this film was just too close to that film.
Yeah. My first impression of the Phantasm, definitely what you said, it kind of had that Shredder sort of meets Skeletor kind of look.
Yeah.
And I always looked at the Phantasm was kind of like the Grim Reaper. You had that axe on the left hand, the ripped cape, and that booming deep voice.
Definitely some kind of executioner vibe to
it. Yeah, and the way the Phantasm would appear in the grey smoke was like something stepping out of the depths of hell and disappearing. You know, it was a very, very cool look. And a little trivia for everyone who may know this, or some may not know this, the Phantasm was originally a character in Batman Year 2 called the Reaper. And the Reaper didn't look anything like the Phantasm. The Reaper looked very close to what you said, Rex, like this executioner sort of look, at this like very old-fashioned Grim Reaper meets executioner kind of look. And that's where Bruce Timm and the gang got the idea for Phantasm was they based it off this old character in the comics called the Reaper. But yeah, I definitely agree. You know, definitely had that sort of executioner kind of look. And the interesting thing about this, when I was rewatching this, was the Phantasm was never ever addressed by name, not once. Did you notice that?
I did notice that. I noticed that as well. Like, it was clearly you were supposed to be. You knew that it wasn't Batman, but you were supposed to almost be in the headspace of, is this Bruce Wayne? You know, because he does those scenes at the start of the film where he actually isn't yet Batman. Remember, say he becomes Batman in this.
Yeah.
We get to see the origin of him changing the way that he looks into a more fearful version. Because all he is at first is just a mask, like a vigilante guy, isn't he? Wearing a balaclava, etc., like that, doing
Yeah,
all
they got
that
a
stuff.
lot of the
Stopping that truck, yeah.
yeah.
Like the Phantasm character almost like inspires. You can see that he kind of gets inspired by the dark cape and all that kind of look. You know what I mean? Like almost like the Phantasm character is what clicks in Bruce's head for him to have a more darker look and a more darker tone to Batman.
Yeah.
So you could actually even say further than him being, I think he actually could have been the inspiration behind the Batsuit. You know, if you're watching it in this film in the way that it's this animated film in the way that it's actually portrayed, and Bruce goes from being just a vigilante who's dressed with a belt and a balaclava and a long detective coat, all of a sudden he turns into where he's got a better suit, whatever else, and then he's donning the Batman suit. A lot of that could be down to the fact that he's seen another more maybe skilled fighter in the Phantasm and thought, you know what, that's actually a pretty good idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because at the same time, like you say, you know, and I know that this film is taking a look into the past and whatever else. But even in the modern time, Bruce doesn't become Batman until midway through this film, when he decides, when he gets scared, when he's with Andrea and the bats come out, and he realizes how spooky the bats are. We've always known that. But when I look at this as the way that it is presented, it's almost like it's designed to show you Bruce wasn't actually Batman. That's why you don't get much reference to Batman or the Phantasm in this, because no one knows who these characters are and or if they're actually the same character.
That's true. I agree.
All they know is that for the last few years, there's been this random guy dressing up in a dark outfit, taking out certain types of criminals. Now, no one by this stage of even when Batman comes out, you kind of know the difference between Batman and the other ones. But still, let's be perfectly honest, the way that they portray this, any of these characters could either be the same or they could all be different characters.
Definitely. A lot of the story is very heavily influenced by Batman Year One, as you said, about you know, seeing Bruce Wayne making the early developments in making his crime fighting persona, although we don't see him become Batman until like midway through the flashbacks, but you can clearly see in these flashbacks he meets Andrea Beaumont for the first time, and this is all happening after, you know, Phantasm had Chucky's soul taken out. And these gangsters that you see in the movie getting taken out, they're all part of one big large group called the Valestra mob. And one particular person is part of this mob, who we are going to be touching upon in the moment, is Jack Napier. And for those who don't know that name, Jack Napier is, of course, the Joker. Joker's role in this film, he wasn't the main villain, but he had a very important role in this one. And this is the first time in animation we actually saw pre-Joker Jack Napier, but he didn't have any speaking words, did he?
He just had where he acted a bit creepy around Andrea.
Oh, yeah, all that
growled
stuff.
at her or whatever. Yeah, like growled at her. And, you know, we do actually get, which I thought was really clever, we do actually get the Batman realizing that he had actually met the person who was Joker years before.
I love that. And I love the way they did that as well. Like you said, that you have in the flashback, Bruce Wayne drops off Andrea at her house. You see Jack Napier outside having a cigarette. And then that moment, young Bruce Wayne
growls at her and then flicks the cigarette at Bruce Wayne's car, doesn't he?
Yeah, they both lock eyes for the first time. And then they go back to that again, as you say, years later, where Bruce finds the old photograph of the Valestra mob and he gets the red pencil out and draws the grin on Jack Napier's face. I thought that was very, very well done. And you got to remember, I'm watching this. This is 1985. I'm watching this, and Bruce Wayne working out the identity of this gangster standing there in the shadows. I thought this is something you would have seen in a live action movie. I'm not supposed to see things like this in cartoons. It was just incredible. It was just absolutely incredible.
I remember my friend who's a bit older than me. He's about 40 now. I remember him about 10 years ago talking about these animated films and saying, as far as he was aware, this was because they knew they were going in the direction of, like I strongly believe that this was supposed to be part of the animated series. And they knew they were going in the direction of Joel Schumacher's Batman, because this is where you got to remember that between 1992 and 1994, that's where they started getting overwhelmed with complaints from parents saying, what on earth is this that you've released? Remember, a lot of the kids couldn't go and watch Batman Returns at first. And then they had to wait until Batman Returns came out on video. So a lot of kids didn't watch Batman Returns until 93, 94, when it came out on VHS. And a lot of parents were madly concerned, weren't they, about the darkness.
Yeah, I remember.
And, especially in this country, let's be honest, this is where Mortal Kombat was getting run through the mill in 92, 93 times. Yeah, there was no way escaping. Even Power Rangers got ran through the mill. Come on, you were not
that got a little panned as well.
92, 93. Like, there were certain things that happened in Power Rangers that I was adamant that did not happen, because obviously they cut them out of our versions of the Power Rangers episodes and the Turtles episodes, even the cartoons. Yeah.
To a point, yeah.
The certain Ninja Hero Turtles instead of Ninja Turtles. They weren't having any of that nunchuck stuff. So in this country, I know for a fact there was massive complaints about Batman Returns being too dark, being way too adult friendly, way too adult cautious, and them saying that a Batman film would never be successful like this in this country. Now, as successful as Batman Returns actually was, I think that the Mask of the Phantasm was a way of trying to blend the two. That because this is animated, you can be slightly darker, but still keep the kid-friendly thing where kids are going to want to watch it. But at the same time, they never could have got away with putting this. You've got to imagine this is a live-action film.
Yeah.
As much as we would have enjoyed it, our parents would have not liked this. Spooky, floating around on a bed of smoke and air.
Yeah.
Masked character who's not Batman in this film, spooking people with a claw in his hand and stuff. It's too much like the Candyman and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, let's be fair. How close to Candyman would the real life version of the mass Phantasm and Candyman came around about that time? There's no way that this would have been a 12 or a PG. This would have been a 15 or maybe even an 18 if it was a live action film. They did this almost as a response, I think, because they wanted to show that they could show Batman in a darker light. But it wasn't such a concerning thing. But the amount of, honestly though, bro, it's the killing, it's the murdering and the killing. Like the amount, and I know that we have to get certain developments, and even Marvel's gone down that road of having characters be killed. But honestly, man, how many characters in this get killed as well as?
Oh, it's quite a few.
Like the girl's dad is murdered at some point. You don't get to see it, but he's murdered. That the Chucky guy's been murdered, the fat guy gets murdered, all of a sudden, wait a second, like we're starting to get a body count in this cartoon. Like, I'm not saying it's a problem to me. Like, and I want to speak about this now. Without me knowing, obviously, that the female was thinking, I actually thought it was going to turn out to be that Arthur guy who was going to end up being.
See, that's funny because I actually thought when I was watching, I thought it was the dad.
No, that's the thing where I thought.
Originally, I thought it was the dad at first.
It would have been the dad. And my first thought actually genuinely was, this is going to turn out to be him, Arthur, the guy who Bruce actually knows. It's going to turn out to be him, because at first I thought he was Robin. But then I quickly looked, that's not Robin.
No.
And then obviously you hear Arthur, don't you? Arthur.
Yeah.
What were they trying with Aquaman here? And it's like, no, that's not Arthur Curry, because he would have been blonde, wouldn't he, at this stage?
Yeah.
And then obviously I realised that he's just a random guy in this program who's got some connection to the family and whatever.
Well, Arthur Reeves, although he had a small role, he was the councilman. He was the one who was basically the anti-Batman protesting campaign, where he wanted Batman, out of the way, because he felt that, well, why are we trusting this guy who's a vigilante? He's going around killing people off, and obviously Commissioner Gordon, being Batman's close associate, saying no, whatever happened to such and such, it's nothing to do with Batman, blah blah blah. His role was in this movie, Arthur Reeves, he was the guy who brought all these gangsters together with Andrea's dad, and he was to do with the money side of the
Well, he worked
business.
for the dad, didn't he?
Yeah, he worked for the
Yeah,
dad. He was like the dad's right hand man.
what he did was he sold out the dad.
Yeah,
He to advance his political career. He
correct.
sold the dad out, and that's where the dad ended up getting killed, which obviously then ties in and leads to the daughter becoming the Phantasm.
Yes.
And then where we get the story and it plays out the way that it plays out. I mean, like I said, it could have played out differently. I'm sure when they were designing this, they were debating over who should be the Phantasm, as in who in this series. But I will say this, because you mentioned Gordon's name. I actually can't stand the Jim Gordon that is in the Batman animated series. I think he's so weak compared to all of the other Gordon characters. It's almost like they didn't know where to go with Jim Gordon at this stage, because they'd not had him doing anything in the movies at this point. He was pretty much a standoff character in the films at this stage, wasn't he?
Well, Jim Gordon, in the original comics, initially, Jim Gordon started off as a tough as nails cop, and then they just watered him right down when you get to like the 60s.
His niece or his daughter, Batgirl is really his daughter, isn't she? Or his
In the
niece,
comics, yeah. It was
Alfred's
Gordon.
niece, like it was retconned in the story and whatnot that we got given, which I didn't have a problem with that. But we all knew that Barbara Gordon was Batgirl. You know what I mean? I don't know about you, but I was always aware that Barbara Gordon was Batgirl, and then she breaks her back, doesn't she?
Oh no, Joker shot Barbara Gordon and paralyzed her.
In the spine, she becomes the Oracle, doesn't she?
Yeah, that didn't happen in the animated universe. That happened in the comics.
In the comics, it still hasn't happened in the DC universe either. Like that's something that was supposed to have happened. If you remember that Darren Aronofsky Batman film that was supposed to have come out about 20 years ago. I don't know if you ever heard about that. Someone actually put a video up about that the other day. It was the Darren Aronofsky Batman film, and it was supposed to come out, I think, after Batman and Robin, but before Batman Begins, and it was supposed to be centered around, Batman later down the line or whatever, and it was going to be it was supposed to be a year one thing, but it was supposed to feature all of the characters like Barbara Gordon and all those people.
Yeah.
Supposed to have George Clooney again as Batman, because he was the person obviously who signed the role. I don't know why DC and Warner Brothers were signing those stupid contracts back in the 90s where for somebody to play the role, they'd have to play the role 3 times. No, this is Batman. You'll play it once and you'll shut your mouth and you'll move on. Yeah. Or you play it very, very well, and then you can come back and play it again. Like, let me ask you this question. Knowing now how many actors have been overlooked for the roles of Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, etc., I would have rather have had, if they've already done 8 movies each, I would have rather have had a different person in every single film, just so that I can see who actually in the end would have been the best. Like we get now with Batman, we can now all debate and say, right, well, we know that Michael Keaton was probably the best Batman, like, overall, because of the Batman that he got given. We know that Christian Bale was probably the best Batman, as in the Batman character, and Bruce Wayne, like all round. Because obviously, like I say, when you look at Michael Keaton, he's Batman. He's not Bruce Wayne. He's not very good as Bruce Wayne, I don't think. Yeah,
he's okay.
But he's good as Batman. Yeah, Christian Bale was good as both of them. Whereas I'm getting this feeling now, like with Robert Pattinson, he's got the ability to be the best out of them all, but I feel that they're gonna lean him more towards being Bruce Wayne than Batman, which I actually think is a problem. I think that you can't portray Batman and Bruce Wayne in the same way. I think there have to actually be 2 different people, like not 2 different actors, obviously, because that'd just be stupid. But I actually think that Bruce Wayne and Batman should slightly be portrayed, like even their accents should be different. You know what I mean? Like with what Bale did, where his voice as Batman is a very deep, dark, I'm Batman. And then as Bruce Wayne, it's more, no, Alfred, I'm not doing that. What are you talking about? You know where I'm coming from? Like, obviously, I know that we've swayed away from the Mask of the Phantasm thing, where it's the same subject to the portrayal of Batman. I think in this film, in this cartoon. Is it Kevin Conroy?
Yeah.
I think his portrayal of this, how do I explain this? His portrayal of this version of Batman and Bruce Wayne, if you listen carefully, his voice isn't the same as Batman.
No, it's not.
It's
That's what I
slightly
was going to touch
Batman
upon.
voice.
The way Kevin Conroy, and for me, Mask of the Phantasm is, as far as voice acting, I mean, he was great in the animated series, of course, but I think with Kevin Conroy's performance in Mask of the Phantasm is you see Bruce Wayne in the flashbacks. It's still Bruce Wayne that we know, but it's a little bit higher because he's very young. And then you see Bruce Wayne years later. Obviously, he's now Batman. He's still Bruce Wayne, but it's a little bit slower, a little bit more quieter, but it's still Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
But then, as you say, when you get to Batman in the costume, he's Batman. You hear that voice, that deep, gravelly voice, but it's not gravelly like a Christian Bale or Ben Affleck. It's kind of like Michael Keaton's Batman, very quiet. Obviously, it's a little bit higher because it's Bruce Batman's got a much higher voice, but it's still like Michael Keaton's, just very light, very dark. It's almost like very well balanced out. And I thought the way Kevin Conroy did that in this movie in particular was just outstanding. It was just really good because you look at young Bruce Wayne and you look at Bruce Wayne in the present and you look at Batman, they don't sound like the same guy, even though it's played by one guy, but they don't sound like the same guy, do they?
They're not supposed to. The whole emphasis of Batman is supposed to be, it's like a out of body sort of experience. Like if you look at the scene where Bruce decides to take on those vigilantes as those criminals, sorry, as Bruce, and they end up getting the better of him because he makes a poor judgment because Andrea's like in his eyeline, he doesn't want her to get hurt or anything.
Yeah,
You can clearly see we're getting the image of he needs to do this separated from the person, as he can't do this as Bruce Wayne. That's the clear indication that he can't do this as Bruce Wayne. And also you also get the indication that he isn't invincible. He's not such a great person at this point. He has to develop what he does, because immediately in the next scene you get to see him drawing the pictures for a costume or whatever.
yeah.
And at that point there, it's like it is very much this masked, assailant, masked guy. He has to strike fear into people, and it's almost like he wants to separate himself completely away from Bruce Wayne, because Bruce Wayne just does not put that fear of danger into people.
Another thing in this movie, the way Phantasm takes out the villains, it's very interesting because at the beginning, Phantasm didn't really take out Chucky Soul as such. Phantasm just like jumped out of the way, and Chucky just drove over the side of the building into the other side of the window.
Yeah.
And I thought the way Phantasm, I mean, tell me if you remember this, in the cemetery, you see Phantasm. You don't actually see Phantasm do it, but you see like the smoke lift up the statue and just crashes onto the other gangster, Buzz Bronski. That was quite dark, I thought, for a cartoon, because
it's the whole social justice warriors and angry parents. We don't want to show you this. You have to just use, like, the car crash thing to a child might, in a cartoon, could have left a little bit of confusion, to be honest, because we see multiple characters in cartoons have car crashes and they either walk out dizzy and all that, not hurt or anything like that. Like, one thing that we've seen multiple times is that some of these characters don't die. You know what I mean? Like in these situations.
You don't see him die.
So you didn't actually expect, like, until you just mentioned it now, it didn't really resound to me that he died in the car crash. Obviously, drove from one building to another. Obviously, got hurt. But I didn't even think he really died at that point there. But you are right. It's very interesting that they had this masked character with a blade on his arm, etc., that could have just butchered someone to death. And I'm sure if it had been a live action film, we would have got a bit more graphical stuff going on. That we just got more of subtle hint towards this character won't be around no more.
No.
More than what you would have got in the animated series, but way less than you would have got in the movie.
The thing is, though, when the car crashes, obviously you don't see them die, but if you listen closely, when the car crashes through the window and it lands on the ground, if you listen very closely, you hear almost a sound like a head hitting the steering wheel,
Yeah, yeah.
and it goes beep, and I thought,
Like, it's the
oh,
beeping. That's what I thought. It's almost like the body lands. You get to hear that the body has landed in a not very nice position. And
yes,
obviously, as an adult watching it the other day, as an adult, my first thought was, oh, he's not going to be around anymore.
no,
Do you know what I mean? I just
yeah.
immediately thought he's not going to be around anymore.
And then Buzz Bronski, I mean, it's one thing to get taken out in a car crash, but to get taken out in a cemetery, and you see like, because you always hear the Phantasm say, "Your angel of death awaits," and then to actually get taken out by an angel statue. I remember watching it again. I thought, my God, this is actually quite scary for a
Quite
cartoon.
relevant, quite dark, but also a little bit convenient. Like, as in, like, they made it so that a child could follow along with that part there. The, like you say, the angel of death, and then sort of minutes later he falls into a random. Instead of running back towards the guys that he would protect him, he runs away from them, of course, into the dark cemetery, and ends up falling into an open grave, and can't then climb out of that open grave. And I just kind of thought to myself, subtly they could have used his weight. They didn't use his weight as a reason why he couldn't climb out. They used it because it was their grave was too deep. But then at the same time, like I said, you could clearly see what was going to happen. He looks up at the angel statue thing, and
Oh, I still remember that.
and like I said, I kind of remember that from being a kid and seeing it and thinking, like, you know, in cartoons, death doesn't normally always register to when you're watching cartoons as a child,
No, it doesn't.
or you just know, oh, he's effed. You know what I mean? You just know in your head, like, you know, he's effed. We're not going to see him again. And then obviously in the next couple of scenes where you get to see the mob guys getting paranoid and, you know, leading into where they're very scared. The Valeska guy or whatever his name is. He is very scared, isn't he? He's old, obviously. He's barely breathing and stuff like that. Yeah. And he's saying, look, man, someone's whacking the gang.
That scene where the Buzz got taken out, you know, you see him like he falls in, and you see Phantasm looking over him. He's like, "Farewell, Mr. Bronsky." And I remember watching that again. I thought, okay, that's it. And the next thing you know, the gangster just looks up. You see the angel statue goes, and you hear that big, almost like Dracula, like. I thought, oh jeez.
The guys, his henchmen walk up, don't they?
And
they see the henchmen walk up, and they see him in the hole, but we don't get to see him in the hole. And obviously, you get to look at it's like shocked. And obviously, what you're supposed to read from that, of course, is if this is what a gangster would react like to this situation, imagine how gruesome it actually is inside of that hole.
Yeah, it's very. I forgot how you know, when I was rewatching this, I forgot how dark some of the moments were in this movie, and even with the main boss, Salvatore Valestra, you can see he's, like you said, he's much older. He's not breathing well. He's not in the best of health, and you see Phantasm very creepily going into his room. And I remember the first time as a kid, I remember watching it. You see Phantasm coming, and you hear Phantasm saying, "Your angel of death awaits, Mr. Valestra," and he pulls the newspaper out, and you see Valestra sitting there like a vegetable with the Joker grin. I remember jumping out of my chair, absolutely terrified, because you wouldn't see that in a cartoon, would you?
Do you know what? As a child, when I watched that, I don't know if it's because I was so young. I was only about 6 or 7 or 8 when I watched this.
Yeah.
I kind of registered that. I didn't understand it. Like, what, he's laughed himself to death. I didn't understand, obviously, the hysteria and the hysterics to sometimes when you get scared, you're so scared that you will snap into like a paranoid delusion of laughing. It's actually proven in real life. It's basically how the Joker becomes the Joker, isn't it? Yeah. He's obviously giving some people some kind of toxin or whatever, but we don't get to see that. We don't get to see any sort of injection or anything like that. We just know that between the Joker showing up and Bruce finding the guy or whatever, when he goes to find Valestra, we just know that the Joker has done some insane things to this guy. That's all we're supposed to take from this, that there is an insane happening here. You know, something happened. I mean, I will say this, though, because I've just remembered this now. Did you want to mention who, because we're going to speak about this person now, because he obviously becomes a main part of the actual plot line, the father, Carl
Beaumont.
Yeah, Cal or Carl Beaumont. Yeah.
Carl Beaumont.
Yeah. When you mentioned it at first, I didn't really see that, but now it's mentioned now. It does make me think of that now. Did you mention that he reminded you of what he looked like somebody before? Not in
Tony Stark.
yeah. He reminded. When I look back now, he does remind me of a Tony Stark from the Iron Man cartoon / Howard Stark, like hybrid sort of character. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's got the grey patches of Howard Stark, hasn't he? But he's also got the look of Tony Stark. I kind of got that from him. But then at the same time, I also get that sort of Tony Stark vibe, like from Bruce Wayne as well. When you get to see Bruce Wayne in this, like, I don't know if it was coincidental or whatever, but maybe it's just because it's animated. But even the way that they kind of even make Bruce's dad sort of look like an older version of Bruce with the mustache and stuff, like, do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It's like very much like a Tony Stark and Howard Stark thing. There's definitely something in this cartoon more than any other Batman film or Batman thing that I've seen, where you do get this genuine link of Bruce wanting to prove something to his dad, that he's become a strong man and he's grown up and become something rather than something more than just being a billionaire philanthropist or whatever. Whereas with Tony Stark, there was almost the element of none of them ever got the chance to actually show their fathers, although we know that Howard was directly involved in stuff, whereas it's been hinted over the years that Bruce's dad or Thomas Wayne was involved in some. They've obviously retconned his character, and it's definitely to do with them. Make no mistake that those two characters are almost identical, aren't they? They're the two guys that have no powers, that use the gadgets, that are all billionaires, that have got money, all this stuff. Slightly different stories, but let's not make no mistake that Howard Stark and Thomas Wayne are almost the same character, and Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne are almost the same character.
The next scene we get after Salvatore Valestra gets blown to bits, thanks to the Joker, is we see Batman arrive on the scene. And this is something I really wanted to talk about. And I felt that we should have got more interaction with Batman and the Phantasm character, because officially in this movie, this scene where Batman jumps off the Batwing and onto Phantasm and says, "This madness ends now," and you hear the Phantasm say, "Stay away, this is not your fight." I really wish we would have got just a little bit more, maybe a couple more scenes, because you're building up to this climax. Like, right, Batman is trying to find out who is taking out these mobsters. If Batman's going to get to the Phantasm eventually, what's going to happen when Batman finally gets his hands on this person. And then that's it. We get them going at it for what, a couple minutes, maybe a minute and a half, and Phantasm disappears. I mean, it was a good scene, but at the same time, I really wished we could have got more. I mean, what did you think of that scene?
I think they also added in. I think the police were a big part of that scene as well.
Yeah, police were a huge part of that, because that's what they were building up to.
They added in the police a little bit to sort of deflect you from the fact that exactly what I thought is exactly what you thought as well, which was, why have we built these two characters up and then all of a sudden it's almost like it's like the tease before the big match, isn't it? Like in wrestling, you get that thing where you actually expect them to have a match. It comes to the point where they've announced this match on Monday Night Raw, and you are kind of wondering, why have they announced the match on Monday Night Raw 3 days before the pay-per-view or 5 days before the pay-per-view or whatever? And all of a sudden they get to the ring and then something happens and you're like, they baited and switched us, haven't they, so they can let them fight at the pay-per-view. It can be a little bit annoying when they do that, and when you can clearly see through that. Maybe at the time we would not have noticed that. Like when we were younger, we would have just been excited and whatever else. But watching that as an adult, yeah, I definitely picked up on that part there where it was like, should we have got like 2.5, 3 more minutes of chase, action, fighting, whatever else happened in this? Or could we have got at least a little bit more of a build up to it so that it felt like this had more? I think this felt kind of anticlimactic, if you know what I mean. But then we have used that word in a lot of these reviews, and Warner Brothers and DC seem to have a bit of an issue with that.
I really thought that when Batman finally got his hands on the Phantasm, they're going to fight, and I thought, right, Batman is going to take the mask off, the Phantasm, but we won't see the person's face yet. I thought obviously they're going to reveal who it is at the end. I knew that was coming, but I would have liked to have seen them go at it.
Well, they had that scene, didn't they, with where, like you said, when he uncovers Valestra and he's sitting in his chair and he's obviously laughing from what the Joker's done to him.
Yeah.
And then obviously Joker sets up the bomb. But
Mm.
Joker clearly films that scene, doesn't he? And I just kept sitting there thinking, well, surely this is going to be where the society finds out that it's not Batman that's doing this. There's actually another person out there that's doing this, yeah? But they don't give that. And like I say, it's very weird that they had Batman, as I say, in the grayer costume, and they had the Phantasm as the darker character in this. So anybody with any sense could kind of tell that they weren't the same person anyway, yeah?
No.
Which obviously is the reason why the Joker almost immediately figures that out.
Yeah.
You know, well, he films him and sees it. But I just think that that footage could have been used in a much more better way. At least let Bruce find out, oh, you know, this is what the person looks like, rather than immediately after Joker explodes the building, Bruce turns up, Batman turns up, boom, they've got a fight. And then within 10 seconds of that, the police turn up. And then within another 25 seconds, it's all disappearing, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, exactly.
Very, very rushed. It was very rushed. And I understand why. But what the positive side of this was, what actually happens to Batman after this? Because he gets a hell of a beating in this scene. Like, they do not live. Don't think I've ever seen Batman under this much pressure in any circumstance from the actual police force. The police are out to get this guy here, and this is where he's almost dead, isn't he, by the end of this scene?
Yeah.
It's the fall where he has to emergency fall. He hasn't yet got the wings on the bat suit yet, so you know, it's just a cape. He falls, he lands on his side. It's a subtle hint that, you know, even though he's a strong guy, he's taking damage there. He falls again, he lands in the thingy, and there's 100 police officers waiting there with guns drawn on him. This guy takes a hell of a beating. He's in the highest buildings of Gotham City, and he literally has to tumble from the top to the bottom. His bat wing is being smashed to pieces by the thing, so he can't escape in that. They give you so many subtle hints. This guy is screwed, and he has to use his actual initiative by using that roadblock sign with the bat mask on it to get out of this. It's so clever how he gets out of this situation, because you literally, and I actually will say this is probably the first time and one of the only time that I generally thought that Batman as Batman was screwed. No way can he get out of this. How's he getting out of this situation here? Like, they honestly have surrounded him. They make it seem like the explosive tanks, like obviously
I was going to mention that.
Yeah, the explosive tanks, they make it seem that's a problem. And the reason why that's a problem is because they want to capture Batman. They want to know who he is. And if you explode him and his body explodes into a million pieces, you might not ever get to see who this guy actually was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Their goal is not to kill Batman. Their goal is to take out and stop Batman and then capture him so they can reveal him to all of the other people. But man, and I know that I keep going back to it, and I'm driving on a bit, but I'll say it for a fact. This scene, I will accept the shortness in the fight between the Phantasm because of what this scene turns into and how Batman is just in a desperate state of affairs in this, and how he manages to get out of it in the end.
I remember, I mean, it was for me, this was probably the most powerful scene of the entire movie. As you say, Batman's just on the run. I mean,
I think the most powerful scene in the history of Batman, until you see that Ra's al Ghul thing where he's actually fighting the majority of the League of Assassins, not even as Batman. Basically, he's not even yet fully fledged Batman yet. You know, remembering that we know that would have been something that probably happened just before this would have happened.
yeah.
Like, we see Batman after the Ra's al Ghul training. We don't obviously get any mention of Ra's al Ghul in this, but we see Batman after the League of Assassins training, the jiu-jitsu training, all the subtle hints to where his training comes from and all that kind of stuff. And then we see, obviously, him develop the character as Batman in this cartoon, in this animated movie, should I say. But at the same time, like I say, you have to then say, well, where does the Batman Begins thing fall in? Half of that movie falls in before this, and half of that movie obviously falls in after this. This would have been one of those stories in Batman Begins where he fought a random vigilante and a group of mobsters in between the League of Assassins returning to take him on, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, definitely.
This is definitely year one Batman. Definitely
that did. Looking back at it again, it definitely had year one vibes, or at least year two vibes, because
no Penguin, no Catwoman. That says no year two. That says let's just agree and say year 1.5.
Yeah, that's a good way. That's a good way of saying it.
The Joker's about, bearing on mind, like, if you patched it in, you'd say year 1 would have been the League of Assassins, Ra's al Ghul sort of stuff, yeah. That then led into in this version of it, led into the Joker being revealed, yeah, at year 1, because he's obviously a top level criminal, former gangster, cartel member or whatever. And then, year 2 would have been Catwoman, Penguin, the likes of the Riddler, maybe Scarecrow, and all those people there.
Definitely. Yeah,
Remember how they amped up Batman real quickly? Like, he didn't become Batman, and then 5 years down the line, like in some of the movies, it kind of shows he started taking on these nutcases. No, he became Batman and then took on literally every single one of these lunatics within the first couple of years of him being Batman. It was the reason why he obviously became Batman, because, like I said, he didn't feel that Bruce Wayne could strike enough fear into these people. Plus, they could then use his family and stuff against him.
Yeah, definitely. No, this scene really blew my mind at the time. And even when I watched it again over the weekend, preparing for this, they shoot the gas canisters and the whole thing blows up and you see Batman bleed. Now, in the animated series, you did see Batman bleed, but not much. You usually get a little scrape or a little bruise. You very rarely ever saw Batman bleed because, it's a TV show, maybe shown on Saturday morning. You very rarely see Batman would bleed, which is fair enough. But in Mask of the Phantasm, he bleeds a lot.
Yeah, he gets hurt more in this physically than he did in any of the movies until I think maybe Batman, The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah, I agree. This is probably the most beating Batman's ever taken in any media, and it's not even from a Bane or a Joker.
It doesn't take so much as damage as it's more psychological madness
Yeah.
setting off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same with Batman Begins as well. It's a lot of psychological stuff that he's going through. Whereas with Batman, The Dark Knight Rises, you can clearly see with all the Bane breaking his back and all that kind of stuff, he takes a serious amount of damage in that movie there.
Yeah, but this one, I'd probably say he takes slightly more damage. As I said,
yeah, I think he does, because then you got to bring in later in the film the them robotic like airplane things. They look very harmless, those drone things at first, but then when you look at it, they're basically flying blades, aren't they? And they do some damage to him later in this.
Right. The next scene that comes up here, and I wanted to ask you about this. Right, Bruce Wayne's done his trick with the construction wood with the cape, and all the cops blast it, and you see the cops chasing Batman maskless, which I thought was quite scary, but really cool at the same time, like really getting you on the edge of your seat. And then you see Andrea Beaumont arrive at the scene in her car. Was you okay with that scene, or do you think it should have been Alfred?
Now, I was okay with that scene because it had already been shown, I'm sure, at that point that she was aware that Batman was Bruce Wayne. Because of the graveyard scene. I don't know if that happens before or after, but I think that's actually
that happened before,
isn't it? Yeah. And what makes me think in my head is at that stage there, it's almost the subtle hint of what's right before your eyes, like as in that should have been the moment that Bruce figured out that she was the Phantasm.
Definitely.
If you know what I mean, rather than it being where he comes in on the next scene or whatever. Subtly, that probably should have been the scene where maybe in the live action movie he would have actually have figured out there, like, why are you here? I mean, obviously they have the rekindling scene after. Now, I think in a live action setting that wouldn't make any sense whatsoever. I think in a live action setting, I think they would have got further down the road and then he would have said, pull the car up now. And, I know that you are the Phantasm. You must be. Yeah, like just that's the live action thinking of this would have been slightly different, I think. But because she knew who he was, if she didn't know who he was and it was just revealed there that she was the first person to see him in the Batman costume as Batman, but with the Bruce Wayne face, I would have had a problem with it. But because she'd already figured out that Bruce was Batman, I don't have a problem with it so much.
I suppose you're right. Actually, I mean, put it that way.
And of course, we get the James Bond-esque. What you always got, because obviously, let's be fair, that's the James Bond part to Bruce Wayne, isn't it? We all know that part of the Batman character, or maybe the part of the James Bond character, was developed on Bruce Wayne, etc. Like being you know, a ladies' man, or
Yeah.
you know what I mean? You know what I'm on about, like a playboy or a ladies' man, etc., 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 etc. I personally think myself that Bruce Wayne has that James Bond in him, and you do get to see that part of it in this, just subtly with Andrea. Obviously, there's a bit more love in the way of Andrea. I think he's got a little bit more in the way of he obviously had feelings for Andrea, but I do think that this is a regular thing for Bruce Wayne. Like, he meets a woman, and there is always going to be the outcome of him and her sleeping together, etc., etc., etc. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It was definitely a James Bond moment.
Because he is
Uh,
a bit, he is a bit of a playboy. He is definitely a bit of a playboy.
oh yeah. Oh yeah. He's, what can you really say? Really, he's the James Bond of the DCAU.
Well, there's definitely that element. I don't know if they took it from James Bond or James Bond took it from Bruce Wayne. I don't really know. I mean, personally, myself, I will say there are signs that they've tried over the years to separate Bruce Wayne from being this playboy ladies' man who uses women and just goes from one woman to the next woman, etc., like they did with Tony Stark as well. But in this early version of Batman, there is still the element of him being a little bit of a sleazy, you know, let's just say, even the Christian Bale character had a little bit of that in him, doesn't he? Like, when are you going to
A
grow up
little
and get
bit.
married? But with this Andrea character, she is slightly different. She seems to have actually got hold of Bruce's heart and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it was quite believable in this as well, if I'm honest. If I'm perfectly honest, it was quite believable. Like, I've seen the Chase Meridian stuff, I've seen other things like that. That seemed more manipulative when I seen that in the movie, yeah. But in this, I actually generally was invested in Bruce and Andrea, and I was quite sad that she turned out to be the Phantasm, because of that element of how can these two ever truly ever trust each other now going forward.
Yeah. I definitely got that
She's
vibe
a
as
killer,
well.
isn't she? She's a killer. She's a killer. No matter how Batman, like he does with Catwoman, I think, weirdly enough, now I'm actually thinking about this now, I think they took elements of this Andrea Beaumont and put it into the Selena Kyle from the recently. He doesn't want the woman that he loves to kill. It's
Yeah.
not him. And there's reasons for that, obviously. You've got to live with it. Like, are you comfortable living with your decisions here? Because I'm not comfortable with what I'm seeing you do. And that's the whole premise, isn't it, of Bruce Wayne, like saying that he doesn't kill. Batman doesn't kill. Even Gordon says in this, Batman doesn't kill. Wanted to retcon that. Obviously, we've seen
Yeah.
what we've seen in Batman, the Batman Return, or Batman and Batman Returns. He does kill people. We've
Yeah.
seen, yeah. But they wanted, I think, strongly to retcon Batman not killing people and never killing people and never wanting anyone around him to kill people.
Yeah. Andrea Beaumont, the character, is actually loosely based on an old love interest of Bruce Wayne's in the comics called Silver.
Silver St. Cloud, or whatever her name is, the one
I
that's
believe it.
character that's from Gotham, that's Bruce's love interest in Gotham, the young blonde girl that's called Silver St. Cloud. Yeah, it's definitely based on her.
Yes, she's based on Silver St. Cloud from the comics. In the comics, Silver St. Cloud had, just like the name, she had like long platinum blonde hair, almost white, and that's who Andrea Beaumont is based on. And I believe there is another version she's based on. She's based on a lady who's in the early Batman comics, like late 1939 to early 40, a character named Julie Madison.
Silver St.
So,
Cloud, I think there was issues as well. I'm not sure, this is not fact. There could have been some issues with her copyright as well. I think that around this time is where Marvel and DC had stupidly started to sell off the publishing rights to certain of their characters. And obviously, because she was a lower down character that wasn't going to be used 10 years before, I think they'd sold the rights to certain characters previously. And then when they tried to use her in this comic book, it was like, no, or they maybe, no. In fact, maybe in Batman Forever, she was actually going to be one of his love interest in Batman Forever, I think. If I'm not wrong, in fact, I'm thinking the early plans for Schumacher's first version, the Tim Burton version, based on the Tim Burton outline, I think Silver St. Cloud was actually going to come into
yes, that was
Batman
considered. I
Forever,
believe that was considered at one point to use her in the movie.
because it was a much darker tone with Scarecrow and other things in Batman, what was supposed to be in the original Batman 3, which would have been called Batman something else. It wasn't Batman Forever. It was Tim Burton's version. It wouldn't have been directed by Tim Burton. It would have been directed by Joel Schumacher, but it was supposed to be like, or Tim Burton, it was supposed to be his film, but Schumacher was going to shoot it because obviously Warner Brothers wanted Burton off the film, but they still wanted to shoot Burton's film. Yeah. And then they realized the problem wasn't Burton. The problem was the fans didn't want it to be this darker version of Batman, like I previously stated. So they had to tone it down. And they actually, if you look into the production, they actually reshot or re-scripted the whole film.
Yeah, they definitely did.
Two-Face wasn't going to be Tommy Lee Jones. He was going to be the black guy, Billy D. Williams. The Riddler wasn't even going to be in the film. It was going to be Scarecrow. There was so much different things in that original Tim Burton Batman film that ended up being completely changed in the Batman Forever, that I think that this is where we're getting this production problem with this Mask of the Phantasm as well, rather than just going with the Silver St. Cloud character and having her turn out to be this. Maybe they wanted to use her in a different setting in a different Batman film, so that's why they based this character on her. But yeah, I was reading that yesterday as well, that they based it on the Silver St. Cloud character.
Now the next scene coming up after Bruce learns who the guy in the photo is, it was Jack Napier, who he met years earlier. We see Arthur Reeves, the councilman, gets taken out by the Joker in very scary and horrific fashion. And this is where the Joker basically reveals that Batman is not the one going around bumping off all the old gang. It's the Ghost of Christmas Future. As
yeah. I was going to say that earlier on about the Ghost of Christmas Past or Future. This scene was like harrowing for a comic book, for a animated thing. It was very, very, very powerful, very scary. Like the Joker, once he comes into this, he does not mess about at all. He amps up this immediately.
He does. And one thing about this scene, it was great. I wouldn't change anything for it. But if there's one thing I would have added to this, right, going back to what you said before, which is going to segue into this, Joker filmed Phantasm breaking into the Lestra's apartment. So Joker's got the footage. What I would have added to this scene is Joker would say to Arthur, Arthur would obviously say, haven't you been reading the papers lately? It's Batman doing the killing. And Joker says, nope, 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 it's not the Bat. Nope, nope. I've got proof. He goes,
yeah, the video.
I've got the video. Da-da! And then just see the Phantasm. He goes, see, I'm not such a pretty face after all. And obviously, you could have had the rest of that stuff that happened after. That's one thing that I would have added to that, the video.
I feel a little bit like the first half of this was designed before they started to have problems with the appearance, and the second half of it, or the last third of it, is almost like they really started to get told over their shoulders, we can't do any of this, we can't do any of that, we can't do any of this. Yeah, but this is a cartoon, this is animated. Yes, but it doesn't matter though. We can't do any of this. We cannot do any, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost like the production team were just absolutely surrounded by problems and issues with the production in this, as in like what they were and weren't allowed to do with this.
Yeah, you can clearly tell.
Kind of tell that all of a sudden it turns into this, not bad, it's very good, but it's almost like they condense as much into this next 15 minutes as possible to get you invested in this. Almost like the animated side of it. This is why I strongly believe this might have actually been a few episodes of the animated series, and then they put in a few of the darker tones in there and realized, that's not going to wash. Let's do this as something else. The reason why I think that is simply because the way that this goes from not really anything on site to next thing you see in Joker, Phantasm, a robotic woman with the knives and all this kind of stuff, and it's like, this is amping into someone's going to get hurt here. And I think once you get bad guy versus bad guy fight with the Phantasm versus Joker, that's when you've definitely got to start questioning, haven't you? Like, kids are not going to like this part of it. Like, even if it is, it's like, you're not technically going to be sitting there going like, go and get him. You know what I mean? Like, you're not going to.
No, of course not.
A lot of you's going to be, kids are going to be like, where's Batman? Why are we not getting any Batman?
Exactly.
There's acid involved in this. There's other stuff involved in this. And it's almost like this is the point when they do get a little bit confused, as in, where are we going with this? How dark can we take this? And personally, myself, I think that I don't know. I don't really know how to explain it, but with these, especially with the Andrea character not being fully fledged out in the DC universe at the time, I feel like if this was a fight between Joker and Catwoman, it would have been seen completely different. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
which we have seen before.
it's almost like we've just figured out that Andrea is the Phantasm because she's been unmasked, and then immediately it's like we're supposed to get invested in her now fighting against the Joker because the Joker's a much badder guy than
Yeah,
the Phantasm is, and it's a bit like, no, we've been led to believe at this point that Phantasm is the big bad, and then Joker comes along and he's the big bad. So who really is the big bad? And it's this three-way dance that does become a little bit, as in they didn't really, maybe they didn't know exactly where they were going at this. I'm not saying it was bad. I'm just saying there's an element of they potentially didn't actually know where they were going with some of this filming.
one thing I liked before we get into that, when Joker takes out Arthur Reeves, obviously you don't really see what he did. You just see him pin him to the table. You see the thunder and lightning going off, and you see him laughing. You just see his great big demonic face, and all you see is like a shadow. Just Joker slips something into, I don't know, maybe his stomach or something.
It's toxin, I think.
Yeah, it was really horrific. I mean, you just see like a shadow. Joker just slips something in, and you just hear Arthur screaming, and eventually it turns into laughing. I thought, holy cow.
It was very harrowing. It was harrowing as hell. That scene was, like I said earlier
Before
on.
we get into the next scene where Batman meets Arthur, right? Arthur in the tie-in comic, which I've got, which carries on the events of the movie. He becomes a new Joker. He becomes like the Joker 2.0. He doesn't have the bleached skin like Joker does, but he has that grin. He basically, what Joker did to him was he laughed so much it basically broke him down and made him go completely insane, and he becomes like Joker 2.0 in the tie-in annual to this movie. So that's a little trivia out there for you guys who haven't read that comic. It's bit hard to find, but it's called Batman and Robin Adventures Annual. It's got a picture of the Phantasm on the cover, but it's the Joker. But it's a bit misleading. You think it's the Joker dressed up, but it's not. But highly recommend it. It fills in a lot of the gaps, if in case you're wondering what happened after the events of this movie. So we come to Batman meeting Arthur. And the funny thing is, though, about this scene, it was funny, but it's not meant to be funny. And Batman comes in through the window, and you hear Arthur say, "Oh no!"
Starts teetering on the edge of a bit like uncomfortable. That scene in the hospital with Batman.
Yeah, it was a bit uncomfortable.
What's his name? Arthur. It starts. Yeah, it does. It starts teetering on the edge of very uncomfortable, which is my statement about we go dark, then light. It's almost like they were trying so hard to make this so that it could be watched by kids, that they also made it so that it was actually unwatchable for a child. I probably wouldn't want my kids watching this at any point. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Very dark, very dark.
It was, because the thing was, you see, Batman's like asking him, "Why did the Joker meet with you?" And you hear Arthur's like, "I don't know." I just feel, oh my gosh. It was a good scene, but at the same time, it's borderlines towards uncomfortable because you got Batman.
It started to teeter on uncomfortable towards the end of it, to be honest. That's just me saying that. Like, it did actually start to border on a little bit uncomfortable towards the end of it. But like I said, another good scene. When I say things, I'm just trying to nitpick because we've seen it and whatever else. I'm not. Overall, you will hear at the end that my rating and thingy of what this.
Yeah, you'll hear mine as well.
To me. Yeah, but I have to be subjective. It can't all just be great, especially if you see things that are a little bit like what's going on here.
Exactly.
And those moments are in every film. Let's be fair. And I'll steal a phrase. There is no movie without sins.
No.
That's why that's why someone's channel is absolutely one of the biggest channels on the internet. Do you know what I mean? Because he knew, like I know, there is no movie without sin. Every movie, even the best movies, have still got moments in them which you would say, yeah, that's nonsense.
Yeah. There's no such thing as a perfect movie.
No.
So we come to the next scene, which is the Fun Fair or Gotham World Fair. and we see Andrea in Phantasm gear. So by this point, we all know now once and for all that Phantasm is Andrea Beaumont. And we get a little flashback of Andrea going into a house, and we see Jack Napier, and it's clear what has happened. Even though we don't see it, you kind of know what's happened already. And this kind of ties into another scene in the flashback from earlier where Andrea explained where she went, after she left Bruce, that they ran away to Europe. So obviously Joker tracked them down and killed Carl Beaumont. Even though you don't see what happens, it's implied that, yeah, he's dead. And as you said earlier, we get this scene where Phantasm walks in, says, "Joker, your angel of death awaits," and Joker just pretty much craps on it and just says, "Gotta hand it to you, toots. Nice scheme. Costume's a bit theatrical, but hey, who am I to talk?"
Yeah, hasn't he? He figured it out real quickly that it was her.
Yeah, he just basically crapped on the whole premise and character of the Phantasm, because Phantasm started this movie off as very dark and very mysterious, and by the end, Joker just basically just crapped on all of it and just says, "Yeah, all right, I know it's you, honey. You can drop the act now. I know it's you." I was like, oh, but good scene, very horrific. But as you say, it kind of like blurs the lines. Like who do you root for here? I mean, clearly you don't root for the Joker. You don't root for the Joker, but
no, I don't know. You don't really know who to root for in this, like in this scene, especially like I say, you can see that part of this movie they've attempted to drag this and make it so that it's watchable by kids, but it's at this point where it starts to get real questionable. Like no kids would be invested at this point, even with a Batman film. They would definitely be either upset, either not wanting to watch, or just completely confused.
Yeah, definitely. And after a little brawl, we get Batman and Andrea. Now, this scene, for me, I mean, for those of you who don't know, Andrea Beaumont is voiced by Dana Delaney, who actually went on to voice Lois Lane in Superman animated series. This scene with those two was just absolutely amazing for a cartoon. Was just incredible. Batman just nitpicks Andrea and says, "You came back to town early to get Chucky's soul so you could blame your father if you could. And then you took out Buzz Bronski and you could shift the blame to him if you could." And
you hear the disappointment in Bruce's voice as well. Well, not even Bruce, but in Batman's voice, but you can hear the Bruce, how disappointed that Bruce is.
I like that.
And he does, if you listen to his voice, he does tone down his voice.
He does. That's what I mean. It's like he's still Batman, very much so, but not to go into wrestling, but I'll use this for this example. It's almost like the Undertaker breaking character. Like he's still the Undertaker in full dead man attire, but he's talking as Mark Calloway, and I got that.
It's the Texas hangman slang. You know what I mean? The little Texas swang to his voice, rather than having the usual Undertaker sounding deep, demonic voice.
Yeah, I got that with this scene when I was watching it again. It's like, wow, this is not, even though it's Batman in costume, we see this is the Bruce Wayne coming out of his voice. You could actually hear, as you say, the disappointment in Batman's voice, and it's Bruce Wayne talking. I just thought, wow, this was incredible. And you could hear him at the end goes, "But Andy, what will vengeance solve?" I thought, whew. I thought this is the sort of thing you'd see in a live action movie. I thought this is incredible. Very good performance.
It's the way that he's totally, and like I say, the name Andy, instead of using like, because obviously, like I say, it's very subtle, but you have to listen to it. Bruce never drops his guard. Sorry, Batman never drops his guard as Batman.
Never.
It's always just Batman. And this is the moment where you're getting Bruce and Batman overlapping. You've seen it earlier on in the movie where he wanted to save that guy from being robbed, and he didn't yet have the Batman side to him.
No.
So he didn't have the side that he realized, I need to do more as what I am, but I can't do more. I'm incapable of doing more until I be able to, put on this mask or figure out what strikes fear in people. But in this scene, it's more he's trying to tone back the Batman and trying to approach this from a more Bruce version, because he knows that deep down, Batman can never love her. Bruce will always love her.
Yes, I really enjoyed that. I thought that was almost like when you watch that again, it's almost like if you was in Bruce Wayne's if you was in the Batman's head, you'd see Batman and Bruce Wayne not going at it. I don't think that's the right term. It's not the two of them fighting. It's both of them looking down on Andrea saying, "How could you do this?"
Conflicting.
Yeah, it's conflicting. Yeah, it's
Conflict.
like Bruce Wayne's
Obviously,
disappointed.
Bruce loves her and he's disappointed, but Batman, it's not the same thing. Like obviously, the love's not the same thing, but at the same time, he would look at her disappointedly because that's not what Batman would do.
Yes, so it's very conflicting scene, and I thought that was tremendous,
Powerful, very
very
powerful.
powerful for a cartoon. Powerful stuff. So we get
No,
to
for a cartoon, this is I'm just talking in general. This was powerful, like cartoon or not. This was very, very, very powerful. Like screenplay and whatever else. And it's amazing how these. This is me going into a positive run. It's amazing how these people, you know, the Mark Hamills and the Kevin Conroy and the people like that, how much grasp that they had to know in their head. And obviously we knew that they were good from the animated series, which obviously was a more PG version of this, etc. But it's amazing how they were so clued in to what Batman would react like or what Bruce Wayne would react like, because it's not just them being told to do that. They're not on screen and acting, they're behind a microphone. And as somebody who, you know, I've done YouTube long enough and I've done other media stuff long enough to know that there is an element of when you're behind the camera, when you're behind the microphone, it's not the same as being behind the camera. Acting isn't the same.
no, it's totally different. Voice acting and on-screen acting are both different.
Obviously, I wouldn't advise being robotic with your voice in a normal film. If you're in a live action film, I'd say learn how to do voice acting as well as acting. But yeah, there is a different element between acting on screen and acting as a voice actor. Trust me.
Absolutely. Now, this next scene, we're building up to the climax now. We're getting near to the end. So we see Batman and Joker fighting. Now, this reminds me of a poster I saw years ago. It's like almost like Batman and the Joker are giants fighting in a miniature version town of Gotham. I remember seeing a poster of that a long time ago. It wasn't tied to anything, it was just the animated series poster of just Batman and the Joker fighting like King Kong versus Godzilla in New York, but it's Gotham. And I definitely got this vibe with this scene. It's like you see Joker just smashes Batman over the head with this the building, and then after that you get Batman just kick Joker in the mouth and you see his tooth fly out. What did you feel of that fight scene?
Well, it's one of the most realistic fight scenes, isn't it? Because obviously we know that the Joker is not a physical character.
No.
We know that he is not a fighter. He's just not quite there. He's obviously unhinged.
Mm.
The moment that Batman, this, you know, physically trained, you know, jujitsu, ninjitsu, League of Assassins trained guy connects with a full whack, bang, Joker gets hurt. Yeah, you see it right there. Like, but Joker can use all these weapons to hurt Batman and to slow him down. But Batman's only got to get Joker with a few hits or whatever, and he will stop this guy. Joker's not a physical character. It's all about what he's willing to do and what he's willing to, you know, put the other person through. It's a lot of mental torture and stuff like that. Plus, the Joker will take torture himself. It's not that this would hurt him. I'm just saying Joker's not a physical character. He's not built to take that punishment just because he's, you know, a guy that can live through explosions and stuff like that. That doesn't mean he doesn't lose tooths and break bones and stuff like that. Whether it hurts him or not, it's a different question, isn't it? But
Definitely.
in this scene, it was definitely an eye-opening situation of just seeing how physical the Batman character is able to be compared to what we've seen from previous superheroes leading up to that.
Absolutely. And I remember another scene that comes up is Joker's on the jetpack. And I remember there was a toy of this. He had his little jetpack and Batman goes after him. And I remember the music was just building and building as do 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 do. You thought, oh, is he gonna actually get this guy? And then he finally does, and Joker like screams at him and says, "I'm your only chance of getting out of here alive. Let me go, we both die," you know. And then you could actually hear Batman says, whatever it takes. So you get that sense that Batman is willing to die as long as the Joker dies. So it's basically like, I don't care what happens to me as long as the Joker goes as well. So I thought that was a really very powerful moment. And
Now,
this,
mind, as I've said previously before, this was before Batman had figured out that Joker, or they retcon that Joker killed his parents, etc. And it's also before the whole "Who are you without me?"
yeah, that came long up.
Batman
That
had
came
not
straight
been
after.
challenged with that yet. So at this point, he was actually willing to kill himself to stop guys like the Joker.
Yes.
Later down the line, it becomes more of a psychological thing with the way that they retcon the Joker character to be the person who killed Batman's parents. It made it so without me, you are not you. It's almost like the Flash thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, with what happens with Barry's mom, etc., all that kind of stuff. Like, you know how this pitches in.
Yeah.
Like, which is the reason why a lot of people complained about Joker being the person in the end who killed Batman's parents, because it made it too much like the Flash. These two characters shouldn't be so entwined with each other. Yeah,
No, they shouldn't.
that's where you got the, well, who are you without me?
Exactly. Now, this next scene, for my money, could very well be Mark Hamill's finest hour. Joker sets off all the bombs, the whole fairground's blowing up to hell, and Andrea obviously says, one way or another, tonight this ends. Goodbye, my love. And Joker, it's just like basically everything's going to hell, and the Joker's just laughing. And I thought, this is Mark Hamill's finest hour. Joker doesn't care if he gets blown to bits or not. He's just laughing because ultimately he's like, well, I don't care what happens to me because I win anyway. I thought was just incredible. I mean, what did you thought of this scene where you just see Joker just laughing his head off as the whole fairground's just blowing up?
I also think if you link it into the last scene, it's the opposite, isn't it? He knows that Andrea is not a good person because she's killed some of these criminals. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Whereas with Batman, he's like, you're going to kill us both. What the hell are you doing? Yeah. But with her, he's like, you know what? You're a killer anyway. And it's basic. That's where the psychoticness takes over. He knows he's F. He knows he's probably not going to survive this. Or if he does, he's going to get massively hurt. The hysteria takes over. And
Yeah.
that's the Joker in a nutshell. When things like when he's fighting Batman, he can't understand, like, why are you so good that you will actually kill yourself to stop me? But
Yes.
in the other situation, it's like, oh my word, I've met somebody who's as insane as me. Insanity takes over and he just starts laughing, and it shows how actually naturally insane that the Joker character has become at this point. Just batshit insane at this point.
Now, obviously, Phantasm and Joker disappear, but in the comic, again, going back to this again, Batman and Robin Adventures Annual, which carries on from the events of this movie, they actually fell into the sewers, and Andrea pretty much beats the tar out of the Joker, and she doesn't kill him because she realizes that the man who killed her father a long time ago is gone. So she pretty much just leaves the Joker to die, really. Of course, he does survive, but that's what happens after the movie. So we see all of the building get blown up, everything
I mean,
gets.
bearing in mind as well that Batman, like I said earlier on, is really, really hurt at this point. He's been messed up by them little drone aeroplane things that have got blades and whatever else on them. His back's caught, his shoulders caught, his arms caught. He's
Yeah,
obviously already gone through the previous scene where he got messed up. This is probably days or hours after he's already been beat up by the police or whatever. So Batman is not in a good place here anyway. He's almost near death anyway. So
yeah.
she does, not only does she save his life because she gets him out of there. If he'd have carried on fighting, he probably would have. How long could he have carried on fighting anyway?
He wouldn't have had much left, no. And we get to near the end, and we get wrapping this up. We're getting near to the end, and this was actually a touching scene. It's one of those rare moments you don't really see it a lot in even live action. Like you see Bruce sitting there in his full bat costume after Alfred's tended to his wounds, and he says, "I couldn't save her, Alfred." And that rare moment, Alfred calls Bruce by his name. He doesn't call him Master Bruce. He addresses him as Bruce. There's something right there to that when he says, "Vengeance blackens the soul, Bruce." I thought, wow, that's the only time I can ever remember Alfred addressing Bruce Wayne as Bruce, not Master Bruce or Mr. Wayne.
I think this was the subtle moment as well, wasn't it?
Mm.
Where you were supposed to see Batman grow up. He's not no longer young Bruce Wayne, this frustrated teenager whose parents were killed previously by some lunatic or whatever.
Yeah.
This is actually supposed to be, adult Bruce Wayne, Batman, like he says. So it's like, you know what, I'm no longer going to treat you like you're a kid, even though I've always liked the reference from Alfred to
Master
Bruce,
Bruce.
Master Bruce. Like, as in, like, you will always be the child that I wiped your backside. And he says something like that to him in the film as well, about wiping his backside and changing his nappy or whatever. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I forgot about that.
Times when you see Alfred over the years, you've seen Alfred's character get a little bit frustrated with Bruce before, and just say like, let's not forget that with or without what you feel now, you wouldn't have been. I would have still brought you up even if your parents was here anyway. You know what I mean? I still would have been here. Yeah. So regardless, we would have always had this, and that's what you're supposed to buy into it. Their relationship is even more stronger because they would have already had that relationship. Alfred would have been the person who took care of Bruce most of the time, and I think they showed a little bit of that in the old Batman TV program, that, Alfred and his wife or whatever, they actually had brought up Bruce even before Thomas and Martha had been killed, because they were obviously busy people. And back then, obviously,
in this in the animated series, Alfred, of course, brought him up, and there was another person who I think should have been in this movie. Was an old lady named. There was two characters in the comics. It was a lady named Aunt Harriet. She was only in for like a couple of issues here and there. She'd just be around. But in the animated series, it was a lady named Dr. Leslie Tompkins. She was a friend of the family.
Oh, the one that's from Gotham, isn't it? She's
Yeah,
from
but
Gotham.
but in the animated series, she was an old lady. She was very close to Bruce Wayne's dad and very close to Bruce Wayne's mum as well. And she more or less brought up Bruce Wayne as well.
Started to figure out as well, isn't it, in the comic books and that Martha Wayne wasn't exactly all stable herself. She'd spent time in Arkham, and she'd potentially done some things. And this is obviously where we're leading into the new Batman film, obviously. Like, she'd done some things, hadn't she, to cover up Thomas had done some things to cover up what she'd done. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think Leslie Tompkins should have been in this movie, if not all of it, at least for a cameo.
Especially at the end.
Especially at the end.
Yeah,
she should have been.
There is also that moment where you get that sort of moment where he thinks that she's dead, but then he notices the amulet, doesn't he?
Yeah.
The locket.
Yeah, I do think when Alfred addresses Bruce Wayne as Bruce, I do think that's when Dr. Tompkins should have come in and says, "Hello, Bruce. You look like you should use a mother's hug," and then just give him a hug. I think that would have been a nice ending. Just like, well, I may not have my mum and dad anymore, but Dr. Tompkins and Alfred are like the closest thing to a mum and dad. So I think that would have been a nice way to end that scene with Bruce.
Got the old lady, haven't they, as well, in the new film, haven't they? There's the old lady that lives in the house with them, that for some reason she's not Alfred's wife. She's somebody else.
I think she's a friend of the family, I believe.
Oh man. But yeah, in this as well, there was the subtle thing at the end with the
amulet,
and then there was the bit where she's on the boat, isn't she? She's still alive and she's on the boat.
I wanted to talk about that one. I know this didn't come out till years after, but I remember watching this. Andrea Beaumont standing there all alone on the boat. I definitely got Titanic vibes with Kate Winslet.
Oh yeah, definitely. And immediately as I said that, because I actually thought that she was going to turn around and say something to bat off the drunken guy who tries it on with her, and then she was going to turn around and boom, you're going to get, either Batman or maybe even Bruce. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like she'd walk down the boat and there'd be like an area where there's like a table and chairs. Guy's got a candle and there's a drink and there's two drinks there, and she looks, and it reminds her of like her and Bruce spending time together.
Yeah.
And then, like she goes to turn away and it's like, care to join me or something like that. You know what I mean? Where it would have been nice to have seen them two rekindle like, at the end and standing with each other at the end. And, you
Yeah.
know, Batman, now, obviously, especially when they did the amulet thing, it would have been nice to have had the amulet scene and then Bruce then shows up on the boat with her. That, you know, world's greatest detective, figured out real quickly where she's going to be, etc. You know, how did you find me? I'm the world's greatest detective. You know what I mean? Like, boom at the end.
Would have been
And
nice. And
that
yeah, that would have been a nice way.
definitely got Titanic vibes. But then I think because we know now, we obviously this is before Titanic.
Years
Anything
before.
filmed on a boat, anything that's filmed on a boat like that shows a damsel in distress sort of vibe, immediately brings Titanic to mind.
I was thinking that. I know Titanic didn't come out till 97 and Mask of the Phantasm came out in 93, but that scene definitely gave me Titanic vibes. So now we come to the final scene and we basically just have Batman standing on top of a rooftop, sees the bat signal. You have that epic score, oh, like that, and then Batman just like jumps off, grapple gun, and for
On
me,
guard, isn't he?
that's
Isn't
it.
he? He's just waiting, like poised for any trouble, standing
Yeah,
on the what I refer to as one of those gargoyle buildings that are in
definitely.
Gotham that you
Yeah,
get where it's got the gargoyles on the side of the buildings and whatever, each corner of the building. You get them in the games and that.
yeah.
And he's
For
basically just
me,
watching buildings, isn't he? And the bat signal comes up.
it's like the battle's over, but the war continues, sort of thing. For
Yeah.
me, this was, I don't care what anyone says, for me, this is the best ending for a Batman film ever.
Yeah.
No
I'd agree
words,
with that.
no words, no nothing. I think the closest I would get to a best ending is maybe the first Batman movie with the Tim Burton one, where he's just looking at
I think that's what we got. This is what we got. We got an animated version.
of that.
Obviously, there was no point in paying for Michael Keaton to fly around or do any movement or anything like that. They literally just panned up to him, didn't they, on top of the building?
Yeah,
And then
that
got the
that was the animated
true
version.
form. Yeah.
I love that. I thought this was the best ending. I thought, wow, what a ride this has been, and Batman just glides off, and that's it, and that's the end. And I think for me, as I said, this was the best ending for forget animation or live action. We're just talking about purely an ending. This was the best ending for a Batman movie ever. I think.
I agree. I agree with that. I mean, at the end of the day, this is the best Batman animated movie, so it doesn't surprise me that it's got the best ending either.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
the reason why, like, I've you know, even to the point where I've even actually preferred this more deep dive, because it's one of these ones where there's less to talk about, as in we know that this is watchable. Anyone could go and watch this. Anyone could sit down. This enough of this is on YouTube if you really want to go and watch it. I mean, I chose to watch it elsewhere, but there's enough of this on YouTube to get a grasp of what's actually happening. In fact, you might actually have the whole film spliced down on YouTube in parts, but I can't confirm or deny that right now. But, you know, it's worth watching this for what it is. I'd say if you were going to watch this, I'd say at least watch a couple of episodes of the animated series just to get a grasp of where they took this away from. But they also, it was a level above or a few levels above for, you know, more adult content, etc. And like I said, you can clearly see that half of this movie potentially suffered from not knowing whether to produce this for kids or to produce it for more adult like. You can tell it's still almost caught up in the Batman Returns era, so that might be the reason why a lot of people might not even know that this exists. You know what I mean?
No, that's the thing. When Batman Mask of the Phantasm came out, it came out on Christmas Day. It didn't do very well because, not in the sense that it didn't do well because it was bad. It just didn't do well because nobody knew about it. It was only after the success of the Batman, the animated series, people went back and said, "Oh, what's this?" And then Mask of the Phantasm has just slowly, over the course of nearly 30 years almost, has built up this cult underground following. It's like,
Phantasm used as like an early film in the animated series sort of lore, because the animated series sort of starts off with Batman already being Batman,
yeah,
as far as I'm aware.
yeah, that
So,
was it.
you know, this you could either look at this as a precursor, But I think it's weird because I think what it was I think, and this is where the production thing that I spoke about briefly earlier on comes in. I just don't think that Warner Brothers and DC ever knew what they were doing here. Like Warner Brothers wanted a cartoon that came out on a Saturday morning, so that they built a cartoon. Yes. And then to save costs, they wanted to they wanted a film, but to save cost, they wanted, they wanted to do an animated movie, but to save cost, they decided to use the same production team that make the animated series, but without all the PG influences. And then thus you get this weird, but really entertaining, slightly over the top portrayal of all of this situation. And half of it leaves you saying, well, this could have just been 3 episodes in the animated series if you take out certain parts of the gore and that.
Yeah, it could have been.
Or the other half of it says to you, no, I'm glad that this actually was a film because it got to express Batman.
Yes.
I think there's this weirdness in the middle, which is because it looks like the animated series and it's technically part of the animated series at the time. But the kids that the animated series that catered to, they weren't the people that were watching this. Also, because it came out on Christmas Day, there's a lot of factors that seem to fall in that make this film very underrated, if you ask me.
I would say Batman Mask of the Phantasm is the greatest Batman animated movie you have never heard of. Because, as you say, it's very underrated. Not a lot of people know about it. It's become very popular. A lot of people say it's better than the Dark Knight trilogy, although that's an argument for another time.
How it's underrated. I feel that it's underrated. It's definitely not better than the Dark Knight live films. No way. Yeah, it's underrated, but at the same time, it is actually the best as well.
It is.
Very, very strange to say that the best Batman animated film is an underrated film. Very weird to say that, because you'd think either they just haven't been able to get the Batman character right in animated situations, but then that don't explain why the series have always been. Even the Batman Beyond series was quite popular and stuff. You know what I mean? It's weird to think. You know what I mean? Like obviously, in certain universes, the Batman character is one thing, and in a different universe is a different thing. But we know what this Batman is here. This is the original Batman. So you can't really go wrong with the original Batman.
I was hoping when they did the anniversary for Mask of the Phantasm, they didn't do anything special, but they hyped it up that, oh, we're going to do something very big for Mask of the Phantasm. Me and my friend debated over this for months. We all thought if they were ever going to do a Mask of the Phantasm sequel, they should go and adapt the Batman Beyond comic where Phantasm returned, maybe, and just do it Phantasm Beyond or something, but they never did. It was just a reissue of the DVD on Blu-ray, all remastered and cleaned up in HD. That was it. And I was quite disappointed because I thought, well, it's good for people who haven't got it, who have never seen it. They can get it on Blu-ray.
Almost like this is a bit of a guilty pleasure for DC, because it's almost like this is clearly too adult for the comic book and the animated series of the time. But it's almost like this is the one thing that actually they wanted to do. Whereas as soon as this was finished, you can immediately tell that they were being told, no, tone down the darkness, tone down the adult stuff, make sure this is a film that sells toys. Even though, like you just said before, where does the Joker toy with the jetpack on it come from? Where does the original grey Batman costume come from? Yeah. Toy from the early 90s. It comes from this and the animated series, of course, yeah? Yeah. I think Joker did use the jetpack in the animated series as well.
Yeah, he did use it once for one episode.
The toy definitely comes from this. You can tell the toy comes from this. And even if you look at it as well, I'm sure the Batcopter came from this as well. The Bat plane or whatever it's called.
The Batplane came from was in the anime. The Batwing was a big part of the animated series. He used it quite a lot.
And was it in Batman 2 as well? It was, wasn't it? Where he used it in Batman Returns. He used it.
He used it in the first Batman film.
Oh, does he use it in the first one? Yeah, because like I said,
Joker blew it up.
We all know that they would have had, by the time that we would have, mid 90s, they would have had 5 or 6 different iterations of the actual toys. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a lot of them were probably inspired by the Tim Burton.
We all know that Batman Forever was a toy commercial, a 2-hour toy commercial.
I'd probably say more Batman and Robin was, but yeah.
And Batman and Robin as well. Obviously, there's no, that's not even disputable. You can clearly see what the hell they did with Batman and Robin. It's much worse than Batman Forever, but you can see where they were going down this road of, look at Two-Face could have been the greatest character ever, and they turned him into a bumbling mess. And you know, for those people who are unaware, and I know Two-Face wasn't in this, but I'd say it anyway. Apparently, Tommy Lee Jones absolutely hated Jim Carrey. He leant into
I've
him
heard that.
during that scene where they lean in and he's supposed to whisper something to him. In real life, he leant into him and he says, "I absolutely hate you." In real life, while they were filming that scene, Jim Carrey confessed that Tommy Lee Jones leans into him and says, like, basically, I effing hate you.
Oh dear.
Shadow, played him in the film, didn't he? Obviously, completely outdid him in the film. And obviously, Tommy Lee Jones is an ego of the past that he's not going to let that ride.
No. So we are going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts on Mask of the Phantasm? Did you enjoy it? Where do you rank it with Batman animated movies? Do you consider it the best? Do you have any favourite moments, or do you think things could have maybe played out differently, or were you happy with just the way it turned out? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below. And Rex, this was a great pleasure going down memory lane and talking about this very underrated Batman animated movie.
You are more than welcome. I am going to give it a rating, like I said before, and I'm going to give it a rating of a 9 out of 10. Reason it's a 9 out of 10 is because I just can't see where you're getting that extra 10 out of 10. There's nothing animated in the DC universe that I think is a 10 out of 10. So I'm just going to give this a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely give it a 9 out of 10 as well. It's a near perfect movie, but it's not a perfect movie. So yeah, I'll definitely give it 9 out of 10. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, thanks for listening. And Rex the Boss, this was an absolute pleasure as always.
Thanks for having me. Take care, guys.
Take care, everyone, and bye for now.